Victor hadn't been kidding when he said that the mechanic was going to become more aggressive. The only reason why this week wasn't my last was because I had Orion behind me, as well as a plethora of precautions in place. If you're not familiar with what Orion Pest Control Services are, it may help to start at the beginning. Now, for example, at Orion, all employees are advised to get lockboxes for their mail rather than regular mailboxes. It would be far too easy for a neighbor to follow one of us home and fish out a piece of mail to find out our names. This is only recommended for people who've had frequent or unpleasant interactions with neighbors. You could also ward off your mailbox with iron. Salt, as always, would work as well, but I'm sure your mailman wouldn't appreciate getting seasoned every time he simply tries to give you your junk mail. Now, when it comes to monetary transactions, cash or preloaded debit cards are the safest, unless you can be certain, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the person ringing you out is human. Other precautions that I've taken when it comes to the mechanic is that I've bought cast iron fire poker from an antique store. Iron is one of the most effective weapons against the neighbors, though it's best to think of it as an allergy rather than a perfect repellent. Some neighbors will crumple instantly if they're within a few feet of it, while others need direct contact in order to cause anything worse than hive-covered burns. Given that the mechanic must have frequent exposure to iron during his daytime profession, I have to wonder how effective it is against him. I do see him wearing gloves from time to time, so it must do something, even if it is minor skin irritation. Either it's a pride thing, or he's just that committed to the mechanic bit. I've been keeping the poker in the company truck. Even if it's not lethal to him, I'm sure getting smacked over the head with it probably wouldn't feel too good. Along with that, I've restocked my salt shells. If the mechanic decides to try anything, he'll have an arsenal awaiting for him. I don't have any delusions about being able to kill him. I think that would be something only a true hero could accomplish. I'm talking about the legendary individuals like Q Kalain, Beowulf, or Maui. People whose deeds are so great that their stories live on to this day. Find someone like that in the modern age. But I would argue that Marc-Andre Fleury comes close. Flyers fans, don't interact. Raina suggested bathing the hagstone in salt water to amplify the deterring effects. She also wrapped red thread along the outside of the ring, explaining that it would help enhance the protective properties. It's a good thing, too. Since my last interaction with the mechanic, promptly at dusk, I would hear the beating of wings outside, and always from the west. I risked a glance out the window one night to find a murder of crows. Ever since I saw that bird's shadow move independently of their owners, I don't look at them. I ignore their calls. I know who they serve. After Raina's additions, the hagstone vibrates against my chest whenever they're near. However, in my case, these were only temporary solutions, unless I wanted to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life and fearing death even more than I already did before. But in the meantime, raccoons. A client called about hearing scratching and chattering in their attic. Her uninvited guest also put a hole in her siding. In other words, it was enough of a mess to momentarily distract me from my own problems. Raccoons are incredibly destructive, chewing up anything that they can get their little hands on. From the client's description, it sounded like we would be dealing with a nest. Mother raccoons can be especially feisty when it comes to protecting their young, so I had Raina join me in case there were any kits. At Orion, we are licensed to use humane trapping methods on smaller wildlife, so don't worry, no garbage kitties were harmed. Though, I want Yins to know that raccoons are not to be underestimated. They may not try to take your soul like some pests out there will, but they can spread a variety of diseases, including rabies and roundworm, among others. They also present a major fire hazard when they chew their way into a home, since they can chew through wiring like it's basically nothing. The first thing we had to do was identify the garbage kitty's entry point. Raina opted to go to the roof, while I investigated the attic. The first thing I noticed was the telltale stench of dried urine. Yep, those were droppings over there in the corner. Delightful. Looking around, I found that the raccoons had torn out a few chunks of the insulation, but nothing that wouldn't be too difficult or expensive to replace. I mean, all in all, it seemed like it'd be a pretty easy call. Then I felt the hagstone begin to tremble, and not long after, Raina screamed. I rushed out, my heart surging with panic as I was greeted with the frenzied calls of crows. Shit, they followed me. She was on the ground, swinging her silver-tipped knife clumsily against the swarm of black feathers swirling around her. I heard her cry out again as I got close to her, and then suddenly the cloud of feathers dispersed, twisting towards the sky with a cacophony of angered caws. Raina had managed to get some salt on them before they could gouge her eyes out. My hand was coated with blood as I guided Raina towards the house. She managed to keep her eyes, but they shredded her with their beaks and talons. I could feel her shaking as we retreated from the horde. Raina tried to hide it, but she was crying, the tears mingling with the blood covering her nose and cheeks like a bandit's mask. The whole time, the hagstone didn't stop vibrating. I think that was the only thing that was keeping the horde from coming after us, and their calls were piercing as we took cover in the house. The client was alarmed when she saw the state of Raina. "What psycho-ass raccoons do I have?" I promise I'd explain later. I honestly don't remember what bullshit story I gave her. And then I asked her to watch over Raina as I went out to get the emergency first aid kit that we kept in the truck. Raina held me in a grip so tight that it left bruises, pleading, "Please don't go out there. Please." Now that we weren't on the run, I could see the injuries on her face more clearly. The deepest one went through her right eyebrow towards the bridge of her nose. The rest were shallow, painful-looking cuts that crisscrossed over her skin. Hey, they can't come near me. I've got something in the truck that'll make them think twice," I assured her. She didn't let go. I couldn't find it in me to pry her fingers off, so instead, I put my hand over hers, hoping that was comforting. The client gently pressed a paper towel to the side of Raina's face, her voice heart-achingly motherly as she uttered, "It's okay, honey. Everything's going to be all right." I'm not sure if it was from the pain or something else, but Raina noticeably stiffened when the client spoke to her in that maternal tone, closing her eyes as if to keep more tears from falling. Her clutch loosened until my wrist was freed, her hand dropping limply to her side. The fucking birds sounded like they were laughing when I marched out to the truck. The sound grated on me as I snatched the fire poker and the first aid kit. "Laugh at this!" I snapped and I swung the poker at the nearest crow. It let out a squeal as the poker grazed its wing, hopping as far out of reach as it could afterwards, and they didn't cackle after that. After we cleaned up Raina's injuries, they didn't look quite as terrible, but just to be safe, I dragged her to the hospital. Now, thankfully, the client was an absolute angel about the whole thing and understood that one of our employees being injured was going to be a setback. I called up Victor to inform him of the situation as well as the entry points that we'd found. He took over where Raina and I left off. On the way to the hospital, Raina muttered, "So, does my little Alfred Hitchcock moment initiate me as an official Orion employee?" Wearily, I gave her a small chuckle. Yeah, you're one of us now. Lucky you." "Hey, I'll take the murder birds over the psycho mantis," she replied with a small smile. Her nickname for the mechanic. I think it's from a video game. I don't know, I never quite got into them. It was quiet for a moment, and the smile faded away as she distantly said, "I think that's how they do it. They take your eyes, they take you, you know?" I nodded, feeling a lump in the back of my throat, thinking about how the mechanic can control somebody just by meeting their gaze. I think you might be right about that. I couldn't help but wonder if the hunt had attacked her simply because she's an Orion employee, or if they were drawn to her because of something else. Was she grieving over something? I didn't know her well enough at that point to be able to tell. They hadn't hesitated to go for her eyes, and if that was the case, that'd make her the most vulnerable out of the three of us. Another thing that I want yins to know when it comes to dealing with the atypical. If you or a loved one has been harmed, one of the best things you can do is support the victim. And if you need support yourself, ignore the stupid little voice in your head that tells you to not bother anyone, and reach out. Isolation will destroy you in more ways than one. After I got Raina settled at the hospital, I made a beeline to the river to find another hagstone. Clearly Raina was going to need one too. Naturally, the stupid birds followed me, causing my hagstone to quiver non-stop. I went into the woods armed with my tool belt and an iron poker. I opted out of taking the shotgun simply because I was going to need a free hand to look for the other hagstone. And there was a small part of me that hoped one of them would try something so I could have the opportunity to smack the shit out of them. And while I was searching, among the crows' calls, I heard whispers. They sounded close, like they came from behind some bush about 20 feet away. But I believed the false egg when it said that the whispering thing likes to confuse its victims. Without listening to what they were saying, I glanced around as the river's cold water rushed around my boots, trying to figure out what was stalking me. The whispers pretended to move further away, but still, I couldn't see the thing causing them. I clutched the poker tighter, and the crows had stopped their chattering. They heard the voices too. Hold on, what were they looking at? And gingerly, I pulled out the hagstone and held it to my eye in the direction of the crows' gazes. At first, it looked like one of the trees, until I was able to make out a triangular head with eyes the size of basketballs. It held up two massive, folded appendages that were lined with sharp spines. It looked to be as tall as a draft horse, yet it was so still that I couldn't even tell if this huge animal was breathing. The whispers were quieter than they'd ever been before. Those huge eyes were fixed on me, and I didn't dare move. One of the crows glided towards the ground, near the whispering thing, passing in front of its field of view. I stifled a shudder when I saw the state of its frail humanoid body. Its skin clung like molten wax to its ribs and spine. Tattered wings extended from the sides of the torso, and the feathers looked as if they were ripped out from numerous other avians and fused into the miserable animal's stretched, contorted arms to make it fly. Where the eyes should have been were empty sockets. A curved beak had been forced into the creature's skull as well, driven into the skull hard enough to leave rigid, fleshy lumps. And now that I've seen it, I think the crows were human once, transformed and disfigured to serve the wild hunt. The crow shuffled a little too close to the whispering thing, and quicker than a blink, the whispering thing's folded appendage shot forward, curving around the crow's midsection, spikes driving into the crow's torso. My mind could barely keep up as the whispering thing then bit the crow's head clean off with a terrible crunch. The other crows began to frenzy, shrieking as they dove towards the whispering thing. Without having to take a step, it snatched another crow out of the air, the flesh ripped with a wet tearing sound. Since the animals were all focused on each other, I took the opportunity to dig frantically around for a hagstone, holding my own against my eye in hopes that it would help lead me to another one. And there was a low hum that I felt more than I heard, deep within my chest, as if I was standing next to an amp at a concert. This was followed by an enraged screech from the crows, but still I kept looking. There had to be one. There just had to be. One circular, black rock stood out among the rest, the water seeming to outline it from the view of my hagstone. There! I plucked it out of the water, looking over my shoulder to see if either of the crows or the whispering thing were paying any attention to me. They were too engrossed with trying to tear each other apart. I shoved the black hagstone into my pocket and I made a break for it, poker at the ready. One of the crows noticed and let out an ear-splitting cry to alert the others. As I ran, I checked back to see that 3 of the crows had split off to pursue me. I wasn't worried about them catching me. The whispering thing was another matter. This was only my second time encountering it, and I hadn't had enough information to identify it, so I didn't want to find out the hard way if the defenses I had on me would be enough to stop it from tearing me apart like it did the crows. And there was another low hum and a rumble against my ribs as the whispering thing used one of its forelegs to swipe a crow out of its way. It had lost interest in them, its huge amber eyes focused on me once again. I prayed that the crows swarming around it would be enough to slow it down. As I raced through the trees and back to where the company truck awaited, the whispering started anew. They became louder and clearer the faster I went, interrupted by the shrill cries of crows trailing me. I did my best not to listen to any of them. The last thing I needed was to get led astray by one of my pursuers. A crow swooped close enough for me to smack it with the poker. The sound the bird made when the iron scalded its skin made my teeth clench. The others joined it, bringing me to my knees, my ears ringing. High-pitched, grating like broken glass against a chalkboard. Disoriented, I swung desperately with the iron poker again, but not hitting anything. And among all that, the whispers hadn't stopped. My head rang, ears going numb. I swung again. One of the shrieks stopped as the poker found its mark. Even as the auditory assault continued, I got to my feet, grabbing the trees closest to me to keep myself going. The whispers became even more frantic as its prey got farther and farther away. The truck was right there. The 2 crows trailing me had finally stopped their dreadful screaming and simmered down to a furious clicking sound with their beaks. as if they could think of nothing but stripping the flesh away from my bones. When one tested the limits of the hagstone as I got to the truck, I swatted at it with the poker, the tip colliding with the creature's skull. The crow's body crashed against the oak trunk and then went still. As soon as I cleared the tree line, the whispering stopped. I looked over my shoulder. The whispering thing was retreating, only visible for a brief moment before blending in among the trees. It couldn't leave the forest, and that was good to know. I closed myself into the truck, leaving the furious crows outside. They glared at me from the branches of a nearby oak. After taking a moment to collect myself, I drove back to the hospital, wanting to hand the black hagstone off to Raina before anything else. At a stop sign, I got a text from Victor. He had finished setting traps for the client's raccoon infestation and was going to meet me at the hospital. Raina was chilling in her hospital bed, face bandaged, wearing a hideous blue hospital gown decorated with faded green and pink squares. "Guess who got the rabies shot?" she announced with a sleepy grin, holding up her hand in a shaka. Someone was clearly given the good painkillers. Victor arrived a few minutes later, wearing a black mask that covered his mouth and nose, smelling strongly of lavender. It made my nose itch. "Why do you smell like an old lady?" I complained. The mask intensified his withering stare, voice muffled by the mask. "A lot of blood around here. Probably wouldn't be too good if I smelled it." Raina chimed in, slurring slightly. "If you're gonna eat anyone, go for the receptionist. He was reading Anne Rice, so he'd probably be into it." It was Raina's turn to get the glare. He said flatly, "You're high as a kite, aren't you?" Raina flashed a peace sign. To summarize Raina's condition, she's as okay as she can be. They had to close up her eyebrow and cheek, and they gave her a plethora of shots to make sure that she didn't catch any diseases from the crows. The hospital doctor wanted to keep her overnight to make sure that she didn't have an infection, and then afterwards, she was going to take some time off work to recover. Also, I slipped the black hagstone into her purse so that it wouldn't be misplaced. After we discussed Raina's injuries, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "So, what can we do about the mechanic?" Raina shrugged. "Grovel and plead for our lives?" Victor rubbed his eyes. "We might be a bit past that point." I asked Victor about the specifics of his deal with the mechanic. I know that there had to be some sort of condition that had to be fulfilled before the mechanic could take someone. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be alive to type this right now. Raina was equally curious. The boss seemed reluctant to speak on the matter, at first. I told Victor they didn't have to share anything if there was any possibility of retaliation, and the last thing I wanted was for him to be punished in some horrific manner for trying to help me. He eventually shrugged a shoulder in resignation. "Whatever happens, I can handle it. And it didn't take him long to figure out that I was the one that helped you find the hagstone. That wasn't pleasant, but..." He went quiet for a second, his eyes glazing in a way that reminded me of when I first came here from active duty. He then shrugged again. "I'm willing to risk it if it means getting a chance to hurt him back someday. Lord knows it's been a long time coming." He didn't tell us what the consequences had been for assisting me, and neither Raina nor I pressed the issue. Some mysteries are best left unsolved. Even though I was nervous to hear the answer, I didn't pull any punches and I straight up asked, "Why hasn't the mechanic sent you after me yet?" Victor considered this for a moment and then explained, "I'm not sure on the specifics, since the mechanic doesn't tell me anything other than what I need to know to get the job done. But from what I can tell, he takes those who are dead and dying, or dead inside, I guess is the best way to put it. Some souls appear to be harder for him to take than others. The hard ones need to be broken down first. As of right now, he says you're not ready." Raina numbly asked, "So, if the birds tried to nab me, does that mean that I'm ready? That they could take me at any moment?" Victor hesitated before replying. "We won't let that happen again. All right?" Raina nodded, eyes low. I wanted to ask her what was going on, and figure out why she's suffering in a way that made her fair game to the crows. But she'd been through enough for one day, and that discussion could wait for another time. My next question was another one that I dreaded the answer to. Where do you come into all of this, Vic? Regretfully, Victor admitted, I bring him the ones that are ready, if he can't get to them himself. He glanced at Raina. As of right now, keep that hagstone on at all times, even wear it when you're sleeping. The mechanic didn't know who you were initially, but I guarantee the fucking lessers tripped him off. I think he's more focused on Nessa at the moment, but if I get sent after you, hit me with iron, salt, do whatever, and don't feel bad about it. Same for you, Nessa. I hated this. I hated that he was being used like this. I hated that he spoke about someday being sent to drag one of us to meet our fate at the hands of the wild hunt as if it was unavoidable. The air suddenly felt like it was much thinner in the room. Somehow I got enough oxygen to ask, what if I learned the mechanic's true name? Would that end this? Victor let out a soft scoff, rubbing the bridge of his nose over his mask. Probably, but good luck with that. I had already figured out that the mechanic wouldn't dance around the fire singing his true name all willy-nilly like Rumpelstiltskin, but I couldn't accept that all of us were screwed. There had to be a way. I had to believe that there was a way. I announced that I'd be back in the morning. Raina looked as concerned as her painkillers would allow, while Victor jumped out of his seat. What are you going to do? He demanded. I'm going to talk to him, I replied. One of us is in the hospital and another one of us is undead. I know it's looking bad right now, but they can easily get worse if whatever you're thinking does go south, he cautioned. I'm just going to see if there's some way I can, talk him down. I haven't gotten that far yet, but something needs to be done. He didn't look convinced, and with how terrible my argument was, I don't blame him. I'll go with you. I motioned towards Raina and leave her alone. Raina, looking like she was fighting sleep, groggily said, I got that or stone and I'm in public. I'll be fine. And if you're going to confront Psycho Mantis, you're going to need Vic around more than I will. Victor agreed. Like it or not, you're not handling this one alone. Remember what I told you when you got hired in? We're not heroes. We're pest control specialists. You know that thing I said about not isolating yourself? And I can be bad about not following my own advice sometimes, especially that one. Going forward, I do want to note that the decisions that were made on that night were extremely risky, and I don't recommend for anyone to repeat them. And believe it or not, we are professionals. On our way to our destination, we stopped by the 24-hour convenience store. Victor was about to question me until he saw me going for whipped cream. I also got s'more supplies, thinking that maybe some bribery would make the mechanic more amiable. I figured that if he rejected them, well, hey, I like s'mores too. Afterwards, we followed the path to the skull trees. During our hike, Victor whispered, That fucker is hubris incarnate, but he's not stupid. If he offers you a deal, know that it's not going to be in your favor. And be careful with the way that he twists words. Something noteworthy is that the hagstone doesn't react to Victor. I think it's because he doesn't have the same malicious intentions as his captors. He may have changed after his murder. Hell, anyone would. But at his heart, he was still Victor. Meanwhile, as we got closer to the skull tree clearing, I felt the stone gradually begin to quake. Up ahead, orange light flickered. The mechanic had a small fire going. He lay on a basket next to it, that cursed banjo on the ground beside him, one arm folded under his head, legs crossed at the ankles. His eyes were closed. He didn't open them as he greeted us. Well, I was wondering when you two would show up. Keeping my nerves buried beneath the surface, I held on to the bag of sugary goodness. I'm here to negotiate. He laughed, still not looking at me. Are you now? What exactly do you think that little thing of cream will get you? Not much, I imagine, I said evenly. But I thought it'd be a good jumping off point. Even though I'd originally protested Victor coming with me, I was glad that he was there. I don't think I would have been able to be so level-headed if I'd met with the mechanic alone. It would probably be interpreted as a sign of weakness, but I was counting on that. As soon as I saw the mechanic begin to crane his neck towards us, I slammed my eyelids shut. He knew way more about me than I'd ever wanted him to know already, and I was afraid of giving him more. Again, another potential sign of weakness. When it came to trying to get him to back off Orion a bit, I figured it'd be best if he underestimated me. I didn't have to see the mechanic to know that he had that wicked grin on his face. Alrighty, let's see what you got. A hand that was as cold as the grave gently removed the bag of goodies from my grasp. Victor. Wordlessly, he brought the cavity-inducing offer over to the mechanic. I never realized how quiet his footsteps were until then. He moved like a shadow. He could have been 5 feet away or 500 for all I knew. And there was the rustling of plastic, followed by the trademark sound of whipped cream being sprayed from a nozzle. Sounding slightly less prickish, the mechanic told me that I had his attention. I'd been trying to find the magic words that would make this whole situation blow over. Nothing that I came up with in my head fit that description. So I decided to be straightforward and then go from there. What will it take to de-escalate things between you and Orion? The whipped cream wailed once again, and a moment later, the mechanic replied, Why are you asking a question that you already know the answer to? Other than my soul. He chuckled softly, the sound too casual and charming for the sinister discussion. You know, I'm curious, puppy dog. Fabric rustled, and without looking, I assumed he'd sat up. Which your parents you most like? Here we fucking go. I tried to redirect him. With all due respect, that isn't relevant. Oh, but it is. His tone of voice brought chills to the back of my neck. You see, I'd be willing to take a trade, find a soul as mouth-watering as yours, and all this goes away. Hell, I might even let you rest in peace. You know what choice your father would pick. I was hoping that the firelight wouldn't be enough for him to see my face flush and my jaw stiffen. That had touched a nerve, just as he knew it would. And that was also a horrible deal. One that I wouldn't even consider, and there was no way that I could condemn someone else to an afterlife of torment. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even that weasel-faced client that I rescued the false egg from, not even my father. Swallowing back a plethora of terrible emotions threatening to bubble up, I suddenly felt Victor subtly squeeze my shoulder supportively. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't hesitate to give anyone who insulted his employees a piece of his mind. But the mechanic was the last neighbor to mouth off to. And that was the best he could do for me in the moment. When I informed the mechanic that I wouldn't sacrifice someone else to save my own skin, he laughed again. If only you knew how many times I heard those exact words. The thing is, I ain't even got started on you, pup. Given enough time, you might find you're more like your old man than you thought. I took a deep breath to keep the mixture of dread and anger confined in my chest, and then calmly replied, Sounds like you know exactly how everything will play out. Isn't that boring for you? The tension that filled the air after those words left my mouth made my chest feel tight. The whipped cream can wheezed thoughtfully before the mechanic mildly admitted, Albeit, yeah, there it is. You already have all of the advantages, I started. It's not much of a hunt if your prey can't even run, is it? There's no challenge in killing something that's already been baited and trapped. So, what do you suggest? Oh boy. I was about to do one of the many things I warned Yins not to do. The only way I can bring you the excitement you're craving is if I have a fighting chance, and a good one. I'll be searching for your name, but I need to know where to look first. His laughter made me suppress a shudder. I remember thinking that I should have known that he'd see through my words like he saw through everything else. The mechanic then said, I know what you're trying to do, pup. But the problem is, you're right. It's too easy anymore, especially since y'all's names are just available on the internet for anyone to find. I'm getting kind of soft lately. This was his soft side. The mechanic then continued. You really think you can pull this off, pup? I know you're a fighter and all, but you're not a warrior. I mean, not really. Being a soldier ain't the same thing. I may not be Kukulane, but I'm as close as you're going to get in Mercer County. We've got a bit of a warrior shortage around here. He snorted. Now you seem awfully sure of yourself as someone who can't even look at me. I'm not sure about anything. That's why I'm here, isn't it? It was quiet for a moment, with only the frogs chirping in the forest able to find their voices. Not even the whipped cream broke the silence this time. I was tempted to risk peeking through my eyelashes, but I managed to resist. Just as my nerves started to get to me, and the mechanic said, So, you want me to give you a hint? That's a lot to ask, but well, you knew that already. You want something in return? Hagstone. Smash it. No way. It's too valuable. If I gave that up, I was dead. I promptly shook my head. He sounded amused. Should have known you wouldn't fall for that. And looking back, I wonder how many he'd tricked like that, giving up some form of protection after being misled into thinking the mechanic was going to let them go, only to regret it seconds later. Probably far too many. He continued. All right then, we'll talk for real. I'll give you that hint, but I got some conditions. You get 3 chances to guess correctly. Each time you guess wrong, you have to give me one of your names, starting with your first, middle, and then last. Don't try fucking with me by trying to pass your middle name off as your first. That made my throat tighten a little more. If I agreed to do that, failure wouldn't just spell disaster for me, but for everyone I knew as well. I'd be dragging my mom and everyone else associated down with me. I'd essentially be doing what he'd already requested, sacrificing others to save my own skin. I heard Victor faintly from my right. Don't. The mechanic wasn't pleased. This ain't about you, Blue Eyes. This is between me and her. And the stakes were getting way too high. I couldn't do this, but... Well, then what? The hunt wasn't going to wait around for me to find another way, assuming that there even was one. And Victor clearly thought that it was a terrible idea. Now, for the record, I did too. I could feel the boss's eyes on me, willing me to forget what he'd said earlier about dangerous heroics. Maybe there was another way and I just couldn't see it. But when desperation has a way of messing with your head. If I agree to this, I started, knowing that I was probably digging my grave even deeper. And I haven't agreed to anything, just to be clear. If I do this, I'd need assurance that you won't send your crows or hounds or any others that serve the wild hunt after those I care about. And that includes my colleagues and me, for that matter. Like you said, this is between us two. The mechanic chuckled, and I heard him shift again. You're feeling awfully bold tonight, aren't you? And I reminded him, you want this to be interesting, don't you? He considered, and then with a click of his tongue, he replied, You hear that, Blue Eyes? It means you as well, on both sides, mind you. Same with that witch doctor. Yeah, I know about her. I keep mine out of it. If you keep yours out, all's fair, right? I didn't feel right with any of this, but the alternative was for things to continue the way they were. If that happened, we were all screwed anyway. And, well, if I agreed, the hint that you provide will have to be both true and helpful. It'll also have to be given in easily understandable American English. No riddles or puzzles or any other forms of confusing phrasing. You'd also have to give it to me tonight. The whole thing would begin after that. Once again, he laughed. Well, shit. You're not messing around, are you? I know how the neighbors do deals. If I hadn't mentioned it, he probably would have given me the hint in the form of a riddle spoken in backwards Gaelic. All right, pup, I get the picture. You know what you're dealing with, I'll play nice. His voice had a subtle sardonic edge. Nothing about this was going to be nice if I chose to go this route, but that wasn't news. "Oh, one more thing," the mechanic added a little too cheerfully. "You have until Samhain. I'm sure you know why." It's June already. Still a good while away from October, but this year feels like it's flying by fast. Like every other year following 2020, he didn't have to explain why. The Wild Hunt are at their most powerful during Samhain, which for those who don't know is a Celtic holiday that eventually gave birth to Halloween. It's when the veil between the atypical world and ours is the thinnest. In short, it's a busy day for Orion. Looks like it's going to be even worse this year. Victor spoke again. "Can I talk to her for a moment?" "Nope. You don't get a say. Either she takes it or she leaves it," the mechanic answered curtly. As I deliberated, there were subtle taps on a nearby tree. Hold on. Morse code. MISSING. What was I missing? Maybe it was because I hadn't clearly spelled out what I wanted to have happen if I correctly guessed the mechanic's identity. If I accept this bet, and if I find your name, you'll relinquish your claim on my soul as well as all the other Orion employees, whether they're living, dead, or undead. Have I made that clear? After a moment, the mechanic answered, the smirk blatant on his face. "You have now." Of course, it was so simple. If I had gone through with the deal without being specific about the outcome, the mechanic wouldn't have been obliged to release any of us. I would have done all the work to identify him for nothing. Tricky bastard. Thanks, Victor. With a heavy sigh, I politely asked the mechanic to repeat everything that we had just discussed to make sure that he wasn't going to conveniently forget something. And to my surprise, he did it without comment, though he sounded like he thought the whole thing was funny. He left nothing out. When I say that agreeing to this deal was one of the hardest things I've ever done, I mean it. I instantly had second thoughts the moment I heard the mechanic stand up and cheerfully say, "Well, you ready for that hint? You're gonna want to open your eyes for this. I can show you better than I can tell you." Oh God, I made a mistake. No, I could do this. I had to. Black cherries. He was in front of me. Steeling myself, I opened my eyes. The mechanic stood as close as the hagstone would allow, a dark silhouette in front of the crackling flames. "Blue eyes. Would you mind holding Puppy Dog's hagstone for her? Wouldn't want that getting lost now, would we?" What? "I don't get all frantic. I can't do shit to you until you get your hint. Part of our agreement," the mechanic said dismissively as Victor approached me. "You'll get it back after." Victor looked apologetic as he gently removed the most powerful defense I had. He had an odd glint in his eye. Was that defiance? "I'll get you out of this, Vic, I promise." The very moment that he was able to, the mechanic grabbed my chin, forcing me to look into his eyes. A church surrounded by black water, a great feast of viscera and wildflowers, black thorns drinking the blood of the unworthy, the great antlered headdress of the white son of mist. Pricking his finger on those horns, he signed in blood. Victor pulled me back, not giving the mechanic even a picosecond to take full advantage of being outside of the hagstone's influence. If he hadn't been holding me up, I would have been on the ground, still recovering from what I'd just seen. "You find that ledger, you'll find me," the mechanic said coolly. That church, it reminded me of something. In the morning, I'm going to check our records. For now, I just want to crash. I'll keep yins updated. On the bright side, there weren't any crows waiting for me when I got home. I'll see you guys in the next one.